Big damage, chunky. Hello guys, Andy here again, and today we're going to take a look at Glavia, and one of my favorite classes, one of my 6 quote-unquote mains on the Korean server. Very fluid class, minimal animation lock, great movement, decently tanky. She's one of the only 2 classes in the game that have a parry skill, which is my S skill right here. When I use this skill, I get a large shield, and when I take damage, I counterattack. Again, the only other class that has a parry skill is Gunlunter. Very tanky, very nice movement, very flexible, great counter skill. And let's talk about her identity. So first off, I'm going to remove all my engravings so we can show exactly what the class identity does. So every time you get full gauge and you swap stances, you get a buff. So if I'm the blue stance, I have full gauge and I swap to the red stance, this is the buff that I get. I get 15% movement speed, 10% additional damage, and 25% crit damage. Okay, and this scales with spec. Okay, so these numbers here are the base stats, and they're actually increased. If you have a look at the character sheet, they'll actually be higher than what these numbers say, and they all scale with spec. So the more spec you have, the stronger that identity buff. Now, if I'm the red stance, I have full gauge, and I go back into the blue stance, these are the buffs that I get. I get 10% attack speed, I get 10% additional damage, and I get 15% crit rate. Now, the class engraving, the climax engraving, which is this one here, this icon here, we don't know what will be called an NA yet, but let's just call it climax for now, actually just enhances the buff that you get when you swap stances. So again, if I'm the blue stance, got full gauge, and I swap to the red stance, it is now 15% movement speed, 20% additional damage, and 50% crit damage. Okay, and if I'm the red stance, I go back to the blue stance with the climax engraving at level 3, we get 15% attack speed, 15% additional damage, and 25% crit rate. So notice that the additional damage is a little lower on the blue stance, and instead of crit damage, we get crit rate, and instead of movement speed, we get attack speed. Now, I just want to show you how strong the buff actually scales. So recall that in the red stance that we got 15% movement speed, 20% additional damage, and 50% crit damage. Note that this is my crit damage, my base crit damage, because I got 250% because I have Keen Blunt weapon, which gives 50%. One last thing, this is my additional damage. So I have 27.89% additional damage. This does not include Grudge or Mass Increase. That isn't included in the character sheet. Where this is coming from is from my weapon. 12.89% additional damage from my weapon, and also 15% from my Nightmare set. Okay, so when I use my Awakening, I get 15% additional damage on every single skill that uses mana. Okay, now let me swap to the red stance. Check this out. I now have 84.8%, 08% additional damage. I now have 359% crit damage, and check out my movement speed, 140%. I'm movement speed capped when I swap to the red stance. Absolutely insane with high levels of spec. And the reason why we don't need crit is because the tripods on your red skills basically ensure that you crit all the time with your red skills, even though you don't have any crit. So this class is so interesting. A lot of synergy between all the skills and your identity and your engravings. It's really interesting. And now check this out. Let's take a look at the buffs again. Now recall in the blue stance, I would get crit rate, attack speed, and flat damage in blue stance. Well, this is my attack speed right here. 98.75% attack speed. It's being reduced because of Mass Increase, which reduces my attack speed by 10%. This is also my crit rate, 1.43% crit rate. Now, if I go back into the blue stance, we now have 56.36% crit rate, 131% attack speed, so that's basically a 30% attack speed, and we also have 70% additional damage. So this buff is so strong with high levels of spec, and that's why we don't need any crit rate. Just saying that once more time. And on top of that, we're in the blue stance. This is our synergy right here. My E skill gives us 18% crit rate for the entire party, including myself. So that's why Keen Blunt works in both stances, in blue and red. Now, I just wanted to have a quick look at my engravings here. I've got Grudge, Cursed Soul, Keen Blunt, Class Engraving, and Mass Increase. If you are like a lower item level, like say 1370, I recommend doing Grudge, Cursed Soul, and your Class Engraving to level 3, because I just discussed how strong this Class Engraving is at level 3. And as a 4th, I would take Keen Blunt, and as a 5th, I would take Mass Increase. I did a quick test with Keen Blunt versus Kerstal as a second engraving, and I always think that Kerstal will just be more consistent, okay? You don't get that 20% damage reduction, and in the few instances that you don't crit in the blue stunts well, Kerstal has you covered with that flat 16% attack power increase, okay? So very fluid build, and of course the relic set that I'm using is the Nightmare set. This basically ensures that we never run out of mana. We get a massive cooldown reduction in, when we drop below 30% mana, so it makes the build feel really flowy, and I'll include some gameplay. As far as cards though, of course this is the end game set here. The Light Salvation set gives you light damage, converts all your damage to light damage, and gives you an additional 7% damage at 18 Awakening. So as far as equipment sets go, before you get your relic set at 1445 and 1460, I guess I would recommend try and aim for the Argos crit rate set. Glavia is actually one of the few classes that can get away with using the Argos crit damage set, so get 2 pieces of the crit damage set, and then get 4 pieces of beast power set from Volton and Vicus. And when you finally get into hard mode Vicus and hard mode Volton, you start working towards the Nightmare set. So that is what I would do. I think Glavia doesn't really need crit rate due to the high levels of spec scaling, especially with her synergy in the blue stunts. So as for the skills, you can check them out here. I'll just quickly run over them and you can check out the tripods, okay? So here are the skills. I can quickly do a little brief rotation demonstration, and we'll talk about each skill here. So you notice in the red stance, I only have 2 skills maxed out. That's because I have them all to level 12 here, and I've only got 390 skill points. So with my skill points, this is what I've done. And in my blue stance, I have, this is the Sinew skill. So E is the skill that gives you your party 18% crit chance. D, F, and W are all damage skills. My R skill here is a skill that lets us get a little bit of gauge. Let's say you miss all your skills. Let's say you miss like 2 skills, 2 big skills that give you a lot of gauge, which is very likely to happen, by the way, especially when bosses are moving. Well, at least you got that R skill to give you a nice chunky amount of gauge. Q is a destruction skill as well as a movement skill. So Q and A are both good movement skills. Sometimes you may even use your counter skill as a little bit of a movement skill. Let's say you're in a tough spot and you got to just move a little bit extra. Well, S will give you a bit of movement skill, and S is your counter skill. I'll just quickly show you the rotation. So let's say I'm in the red stance. I swap back into blue. We want to get that level 3 buff. Open up with a synergy, Awakening, to get my relic set buff. Into D, into F, into W, R. Swap over Q into R, get a little bit of extra gauge. E is also a destruction skill, by the way, so important for later on. And then back, E into W into F, E into D into F to W. Now the rotation is a little bit different if you have Judgment and Conviction. Unfortunately, I don't have Judgment and Conviction, and just a little note, while we're looking at the runes here, I have Quick Recharge on that R skill that gives us gauge. I've got Galvin runes and our longest animation skills. I have Overwhelm runes on skills with a bit of stagger on them, and so on and so forth. I got Bleed on my movement skill here. So you can be fairly flexible with these, just pick what you're comfortable with. But for people with Legendary Judgment and Conviction, people will often put Legendary Conviction onto this Tornado skill, because it's a multi-hit skill, and again they'll put Judgment on the W skill, because it is also a multi-hit skill. And then that will cleanse Conviction and give you the debuff. So yeah, that was Glavia. Any questions, let me know. Quick and dirty rundown of the class and her identity. Hope that helps. If any specific questions, I'll try and answer them in the comments below. Thank you guys.